She leaned close, her perfume brushing against my thoughts, and whispered with a smile, "One little secret won't hurt us." I laughed along, but deep down, I knew nothing between us would ever feel small. It was one of those evenings where the office seemed to belong to no one but us. The rest of the team had left hours ago, their voices fading down the hallway until silence settled in like a blanket. Only the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint ticking of the wall clock kept us company. I was leaning over my desk, finishing a report, when I felt the gentle presence of someone behind me. Her heels had long since been abandoned for comfort, I could hear the soft shuffle of her stockinged feet against the carpet. Then, without warning, she was beside me, leaning down to look at my screen. Her shoulder brushed mine lightly, sending a surprising ripple of awareness through me. She smelled faintly of jasmine and something warm I couldn't quite name, a scent that clung to her like a quiet signature. "You missed a line here," she said, her voice low and calm, pointing with the tip of her pen. I nodded, correcting it, trying not to focus on how close she was standing. And then, as if she couldn't resist adding a touch of mischief to the monotony of work, she tilted her head, just enough for her lips to almost graze my ear, and whispered, "One little secret won't hurt us." For a split second, my hands froze on the keyboard. Her words landed somewhere deeper than they should have, lingering long after her laugh followed. She leaned back immediately, the sound of her laughter soft and unguarded, like she knew she had startled me, and enjoyed it. I glanced at her, trying to read her expression, but she was already straightening papers in her hand, returning to her composed, professional self. The moment passed quickly, too quickly, as though it might have been nothing more than a harmless joke. Yet the echo of her whisper stayed with me. The warmth of her breath had brushed against my skin, and the closeness, so deliberate, so fleeting, had shifted something between us. As she walked back to her office, leaving me alone with the glow of the computer screen, I couldn't shake the thought, what did she mean by that? And why, even now, did her laughter feel like a secret she had placed directly into my hands? That night, lying in bed, I couldn't escape the sound of her whisper. The way her lips had curved into that half-smile, the softness of her laugh afterward, it replayed over and over, as if my mind refused to let it go. I told myself it was nothing, just her way of teasing, lightening the heaviness of late-night work. But the truth was, it had felt different. Personal. The next morning, when I walked into the office, I caught myself searching for her. She was already there, sitting at her desk near the wide windows, sunlight painting her profile in warm, golden lines. She looked focused, her glasses perched low as she scrolled through a document. No sign of last night's mischief. No sign of secrets. When her eyes lifted briefly and found mine, she smiled, polite, professional, the kind of smile she would give anyone. And yet, there was a flicker, a pause just a second longer than necessary. It left me wondering if she remembered too. The day unfolded in its usual rhythm, but to me, everything felt heightened. Whenever she walked past my desk, my senses sharpened, the quiet click of her pen in her hand, the rustle of papers against her fingers, the faint trace of her perfume trailing behind her. Each time, it was like the office itself faded, leaving just the two of us suspended in some silent understanding. At one point, she leaned on the back of my chair while giving quick instructions about a client file. Her hand rested casually on the headrest, fingers just inches from my shoulder. It was nothing anyone else would have noticed. But for me, that small weight, that subtle nearness, sent a current through my chest. I tried to respond as I always did, nodding, making notes, keeping my voice steady. Still, my heart beat harder than it should have. I wondered if she could hear it, or if she felt the same tension vibrating in the air between us. By the time the day ended, I realized something had shifted. Nothing had been said, no boundary crossed, and yet, there was now a silence that felt full, as if her whispered words had built an invisible bridge between us. A secret, perhaps, that neither of us was ready to name. It started innocently enough. A meeting had stretched well beyond its limit, draining every ounce of energy from the team. As the others gathered their things to leave, she looked over at me with a small, conspiratorial smile. "Coffee?" she asked. Not an order, not a suggestion, just a soft offer, as if she already knew I'd say yes. We ended up at a quiet cafe tucked into the corner of the street, the kind of place most people rushed past without noticing. Inside, the world felt slower. The air smelled of roasted beans and baked bread, and the low murmur of other voices faded into the background. She loosened her scarf and set it neatly beside her, leaning back in her chair in a way I'd never seen her do in the office. For the first time, she wasn't my boss surrounded by stacks of files and phone calls, she was simply a woman, her eyes glowing warmly in the soft light. Our conversation began with harmless things, the endless deadlines, the stubborn software updates. But gradually, it drifted into personal territory. She told me about the small town where she grew up, about the dusty record shop she used to sneak into after school just to listen to old jazz albums. I shared a story about my college days, the mistakes, the late-night dreams that felt bigger than the world itself. Somewhere between her laughter and the quiet pauses, time slipped away. What was supposed to be a quick break stretched into an hour, then more. At one point, she reached across the table, her hand brushing against my wrist as she adjusted the cuff of my sleeve. "You really should fix this button," she teased softly, her fingers lingering a moment too long. The touch was casual, almost maternal, yet it carried a weight that made my breath catch. The warmth of her skin, the delicate pressure of her fingertips, it was enough to make the room feel smaller, as though the two of us were tucked inside a secret only we could share. Her eyes met mine then, holding just a fraction longer than what friends, or colleagues, might allow. And in that lingering gaze, I felt it, the unspoken acknowledgement that what bound us was no longer just work. It was something fragile, tender, and quietly dangerous, like a coffee that had lasted far too long. Back at the office, things on the surface appeared unchanged. She carried herself with the same composed authority, guiding meetings, signing off reports, making decisions that shaped the rhythm of our days. But beneath that polished exterior, a current seemed to run between us, something silent, something only we seemed to notice. It showed itself in small ways. A glance across the conference table that lingered half a second longer than it should. A knowing smile exchanged when a coworker made an unintentional joke we both found funnier than we should have. These were little threads weaving us together, invisible to anyone else but impossible for me to ignore. One afternoon, she called me into her office. I expected a discussion about the project we were working on, but when I stepped inside, I found her desk strangely bare of paperwork. Instead, she gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit," she said, her tone softer than usual. We ended up talking, not about deadlines or strategies, but about life. About how she sometimes stayed late not because of work, but because going home to silence felt heavier than staying here. About how she missed the version of herself who used to travel spontaneously, before responsibility weighed her down. As she spoke, her voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. The office, usually buzzing with phones and footsteps, felt impossibly quiet, as though the walls themselves leaned in to protect the words she was sharing. She slipped off her heels beneath the desk, folding her legs under the chair in a gesture that seemed almost private. For the first time, I saw not just my boss, but a woman who was quietly tired of always appearing strong. When she passed me a folder, her hand brushed against mine. It was the lightest touch, a fleeting contact, yet it sparked something undeniable. Neither of us moved to pull away immediately. The moment stretched, filling the air between us with a charged silence. And then, just as easily, she shifted the folder fully into my grasp, her expression settling back into composure. But I caught it, the softness in her eyes, the tiny flicker that betrayed the secret we were both holding, that behind closed doors, something unspoken was slowly taking root. Deadlines had kept us at the office long after most of the city had gone to sleep. The last emails were sent, the printers finally quiet, and we stepped out together into the night. The streets were damp from an earlier rain, neon signs shimmering across the slick pavement. The world outside felt strangely hushed, as though the city itself had slowed to let us catch our breath. We walked side by side without hurry, our steps echoing faintly against the empty sidewalks. For once, she wasn't the commanding presence of the office. Her shoulders looked softer, her coat loosely tied, a strand of hair falling across her cheek as the breeze passed. Our conversation drifted between small things, the bitter coffee that kept us going, the stubborn computer system that never seemed to cooperate. But between those words was a silence, weighted yet comfortable, like both of us were circling something neither dared to say. At one corner, under the muted glow of a street lamp, she stopped. I turned to her, and for the first time, she didn't look like she was about to give an instruction or a reminder. She just looked at me. A quiet, lingering look that seemed to strip away the roles we played during the day. For a long moment, the world narrowed to the sound of her breath, the reflection of light in her eyes, and the unspoken question hanging between us. My chest tightened with the urge to say something, to bridge the invisible line we had been walking for weeks. But she was the one who moved first. Her hand lifted as though she wanted to touch me, then hesitated, curling slightly before it fell gently onto my arm. The warmth of her palm seeped through the fabric of my sleeve, grounding me in a way that words never could. She gave a small, almost rueful smile. "Good night," she said softly, her voice carrying both affection and restraint. And then, just like that, she turned and walked away, her footsteps tapping lightly against the wet pavement until they disappeared into the night. I stood there for a while, my sleeve still warm where her hand had been, realizing that sometimes hesitation speaks louder than desire. The day unraveled in a blur of ringing phones, urgent emails, and decisions that seemed to pile endlessly onto her shoulders. By the time evening arrived, I could see the strain in her posture, the way she rubbed her temple with 2 fingers, the weariness clouding her usually steady gaze. She called me into her office, but this time there was no stack of papers waiting, no directives to deliver. Instead, she sat quietly at her desk, staring out through the tall windows where the city lights flickered like distant stars. For a moment, I simply stood there, unsure if I should speak. Finally, she sighed. "Do you ever wonder," she murmured, "what it would feel like to just drop everything? To stop being who everyone expects you to be?" Her words surprised me, but it was her voice that struck me most, softer than I'd ever heard it, threaded with a loneliness she rarely allowed to show. I moved closer, choosing the chair across from her. "All the time," I admitted honestly. "But maybe the hardest part isn't dropping everything. Maybe it's admitting we're tired of carrying it." Her eyes lifted to mine then, glistening faintly in the low light. The office was silent, the kind of silence that feels sacred. She smiled faintly, almost painfully. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," I said quietly. "But you don't have to carry it alone." Something shifted in her expression. Her hand, resting on the edge of the desk, trembled ever so slightly. And then, as if crossing a line she had been resisting for weeks, she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "One little secret won't hurt us." The words, the same ones she had once teased me with, sounded different now, stripped of playfulness, weighted with need. Before I could answer, her hand reached across the desk, brushing against mine. The cool metal of her ring pressed lightly into my skin as her fingers settled over my hand. I didn't move. I couldn't. The warmth of her touch seemed to still the chaos of the day, anchoring both of us in that fragile, stolen moment. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The air was charged, heavy with everything we had been too careful to say. And in that silence, we both knew, hesitation could no longer keep the truth from us. After that night in her office, something between us shifted quietly but undeniably. There were no dramatic declarations, no rushed confessions, just a soft unfolding, like the slow bloom of a flower that had been waiting for the right season. Our so-called secret didn't live in grand gestures. It lived in the little things. In the way her hand would brush against mine when she passed me a file, lingering just long enough for both of us to notice. In the way our eyes met across crowded meetings, sharing entire conversations in silence. In the way she would pause at my desk on her way out, her voice low and warm as she asked, "Coming?" As though the question meant more than leaving the office together. We started taking walks after work, unhurried, letting the city lights spill over us like a backdrop to something fragile and growing. Sometimes we talked about the day, sometimes about old dreams and the fears we rarely admitted to anyone else. Other times, we walked in silence, side by side, close enough for our arms to brush now and then, each touch a reminder of the closeness we no longer had to deny. One evening, we returned to that same cafe where it all began. The air smelled of coffee beans and rain on pavement. We sat by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass, our hands resting quietly on the table between us. This time, I didn't overthink it. I let my hand find hers, resting lightly at first, waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. Instead, her thumb brushed gently over my knuckles, her eyes softening as she looked at me. And then she laughed, not the careful, professional laugh I'd heard in the office, nor the teasing one from that late night when she whispered a secret into my ear. This was different. Open. Free. The kind of laughter that comes only when walls finally fall away. I realized then that maybe we never really had a secret at all. What we shared wasn't about hiding, it was about holding something tender, something precious, until it was strong enough to exist in the light. And sitting there with her hand in mine, her laughter filling the quiet cafe, I knew it already was. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances. Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to know what you felt while listening.